The Kansas Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired was founded in 1920. The Kansas Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired is celebrating its 100th anniversary. We have captured the life stories of some of our members, talking about the barriers they have had to face in terms both of discrimination and in employment situations.
I am Marilyn Lind. I live here in Topeka. Excuse me, I was one of the smallest babies born in one of our local hospitals. I was 3 months early. I weighed 3 pounds 8 ounces, and then 2 pounds 8 ounces. But anyway, I ended up with it's called retinopathy of prematurity now, but it was called retinal fibroplasia. But anyway, when we used to have a person that when you were a child, she was a home teacher, and she would go to your house, and some of the people around probably know her, Genevieve Powell. And I remember the first time I ever saw a guide dog. She had a black lab, and that was the first time I'd ever saw one. But anyway, when I went to my school, it was outside of Topeka, which doesn't matter because it was happening then anywhere. But anyway, I was in the first kindergarten class. When I started first grade, back then, it's like everything was individual, and school boards and the nurses had a lot of power, I can tell you. Anyway, this one, Mrs. Jones, at Christmas time, she sent a letter home, and I was told not to come back to school at Christmas time. Merry Christmas. Anyway, but it wasn't because of my behavior, it was because of my vision. And I could see something. I've never had vision out of my left eye at all. Anyway, and, excuse me. Anyway, so we went, we went to the School for the Blind and did a tour and everything. And I remember one of the things I asked, where's the television? That was a priority when you're a kid. Anyway, and so I remember the supervisor, whatever, the principal, whatever he was called, Mr. Olson, I sat on his lap and was reading a book, little kid's book, of course, and I love to read. And he said, well, he didn't think it was, because they had kids in Prairie Village and other schools that were totally blind going in with the, regular classes. So anyway, so we came back home, and we worked with my parents. Back then, there was so many babies that were born with the same condition because they had too much oxygen at preemies in the incubators, and that caused fibers to grow around their eye, and so I could see some. But anyway, then when I got kicked out of school, of course, then to get back in school, I was out the rest of the year, and to get back in school, I had one of the first teacher of the visually impaired in the area, and she ended up. Main reason was because I got kicked out of the school, and she's the teacher of. Her name was Nelda Robron, and she went to. Anyway, she went to in Peabody, I think it was. Anyway, it was in Nashville to get her degree. And her husband, I don't remember if he was totally blind because I had two visually impaired. One was totally blind, lawyer, and the other one was visually impaired. They are the two, along with my parents, that got me back into school. It took the rest of the school year, basically, to get me back into public school. We had hearings and everything. Mr. Robron, both of them were fantastic. It was Mr. Robron and Van Bockenberg. And it was, we had to, I had to get tests all the time and everything, because they kept wanting to kick me out of school, basically the whole school time. And luckily my first grade teacher, when I went back, Mrs. Cardinal, you couldn't get a better teacher. She goes, just think we can spend the weekends, because I had to redo it, and she goes, just think we can spend, get to, have fun together. And so I couldn't ask for a better first grade teacher. But Mr. Robron, Reese Robron, ended up later on after everything, he was both of them are excellent attorneys. And Reese Robron ended up, years later, I don't remember when, but he was a magistrate court judge here in Topeka. And at one time when I was like a senior or something in high school, which would have been around 70 or so, he, Reese Robron ended up being the president of the American Council for the Blind. And they moved to Washington, D.C., but I still kept up with it. But back then, to go back a little bit, back then, when I got kicked out, my mom, she wrote out books for me and, tipping me, whatever, so I could see them better. And she used big paper material. Well, back then, I got my stuff from the School for the Blind, she would get. But back then, the textbooks were huge. The only thing they did was copy them bigger. And they were so heavy. And so it was like, because I could see some, and I love to read. Unfortunately, the only books that I could go up to that I could read were like in grade school, because the other print was so small, and I had my head right at it, my nose right at it. Anyway, and so we used to, since I was the only person in the whole school, all throughout grade school, junior high, and high school that was visually impaired, I would often get teased. They talk about bullying now. There was bullying, because back then, when I was in grade school, I would have to go in for occasionally tests, like I said, IQ test, whatever, and I would go to the special ed class. Normally, we had our own area that Mrs. Robron and I would work at. But anyway, so I came out, and because it was back then, it was mostly boys. It was all boys back then. And so I came out of there, and I was called every name by the other students. I was called retarded, everything you could think of. And my mom would go, I'd be upset. My mom would go, well, you'll learn the next time, to hold up for yourself. And I learned how to hold up for myself. That, and my dad was really, and back then we had so many, the parents worked together because there weren't services. It was the parents that, of all these, around that time, there were lots of children born with the same condition. And so the parents would get together and really worked hard. That's where a lot of, this is when a lot of the beginning accessibility and, rights and everything started. Also, my dad was involved with everything. Now, we do have in Kansas, we do have a act that protects service dogs and guide dogs against harm. There is a penalty, and I believe they can even go to jail for a bit, and then if anything happens to the dog, either little or large, the person has to take care of all the vet bills, and if the dog cannot work again, they have to pay for everything. And we had tried for years to get both, everybody to get together with something. And people like to joke, because I testified quite a bit when we had things at the legislature. And I had my third guide, and we were, the last time it ended up in the committee was at the end, they go, may I pet your dog? Well, this dog had the biggest tongue. He knew everybody. He thought everybody should give him a big old kiss. And I said, sure. And people joke and said, they think Jaguar was the reason it went on further, because I let him go around, and he gave a kiss, I think, to every member of that committee. He did not miss anybody. But anyway, and as far as guide dogs, the first time I got my dog, because I would look down, and I told the instructor in Oregon when I got him, I said, wow, you can actually walk this fast. And I was a special ed teacher, and one of the instructors goes, one of my other, the teacher said one day, wow, you have your head up. And so that was the best thing that ever happened to me to get, and it does, it gives independence to people. It opens up, individuals to different opportunities and everything. So anyway, that's my story.
Learn more about KABVI at kabvi.com.